Hey guys, Rob here with McDojoLife. In today's McDojo news, we're going to talk about two martial arts instructors who actually just tried to overthrow the Chinese government. Let's check out the story. Police in Hong Kong have charged a martial arts instructor and his assistant with sedition, claiming they were training a clandestine force to overthrow the government and set up an independent state armed with crossbows, air guns, and their bare hands. For those who might not know, sedition is conduct or speech inciting people to rebel against the authority of a state or monarch. The 59-year-old coach and 62-year-old assistant stand accused of setting up a martial arts training center to incite hatred against the government and to train an armed force for Hong Kong independence, codenamed Darth Vader, police said. In a press conference on Tuesday, Senior Superintendent Steve Lee of the police's National Security Department said the two were members of a pro-independence group whose aim was to establish an armed force codenamed the Darth Vader Army. A total of $380,000 in cash, some of it in foreign currency, was also seized in 3 districts. The seized weapons included an air rifle, 2 axes, 3 swords, 6 knives, and all of which were open and lethal. There were also 8 crossbows and 30 steel-tipped arrows. Martial arts instructor Wong Tak Kung, age 59, is being charged with sedition under a colonial-era sedition law that has been dusted off by police and used in national security cases after the ruling Chinese Communist Party imposed a draconian national security law on the city as of July 1st, 2020. Wong has been charged with 5 counts of acting with seditious intent, possession of an offensive weapon, and possession of a firearm without a license, while his assistant, Chung Man Chi, age 61, faced only the weapon charges. Both appeared in court on Tuesday, but no pleas were taken. The case will be heard by a national security judge and has been adjourned until May 19th under further investigation by police. Both were denied bail. The center had allegedly been training students in combat Tai Chi. The arrested persons were deeply affected by misinformation and became self-radicalized. Now they are spreading misinformation to others, said Senior Police Superintendent Stephen Lee. The national security law has ushered in a citywide crackdown on public dissent and criticism of the authorities that has seen several senior journalists and 47 former lawmakers and democracy activists charged with offenses from collusion with a foreign power to subversion. A Chinese Communist Party-backed newspaper said that the martial arts school had, without any concealment, introduced itself into intending to kill, to engage in armed revolution, and to establish a shadow government. The paper also said that the 2019 protest movement, which it referred to as the Black Riots in reference to the black clothing worn by protesters, hadn't died out, but rather gone underground. It accused instigators of subliminally indoctrinating followers with various anti-government violence-inciting messages. Pro-CCP Wenwei Po said the center had set up a death squad class to teach like-minded students how to use weapons until the time was right, that they would urge the people of Hong Kong to overthrow the CCP by force. It said the center also held ceremonies to pay tribute to people killed during the 2019 protests. Lee said police are focusing on identifying people who may go on to commit violent acts. With this vicious cycle, we are worried those radicalized will go one step further and commit terrorist attacks, he said, but declined to disclose how many students Wong had managed to attract so far. Police also accused the pair of calling on the public to resist government's attempts to contain the current outbreak of COVID-19, including the Leave Home Safe tracking app and the vaccination drive. The arrest came after Hong Kong singer Tommy Yoon and 2 other people were arrested after allegedly calling on people to resist the current COVID-19 restrictions on social media. Martial arts societies in southeastern China once acted as the seabed of an attempt to overthrow the Qing dynasty during the Boxers' Rebellion of 1899 to 1901, which aimed to purge China of foreign colonial incursion and influence. Let's break that down real fast. Basically, 2 martial arts instructors decided to use their martial arts facility to start a revolution in order to overthrow the Chinese government. The weapons that they had available were like an air pistol, which I'm assuming is like an airsoft gun or a BB gun, a bow and arrow, some knives, and some swords, basically. Let's be honest here. With the amount and the type of weaponry that these people actually had, there was no way that this martial arts studio and these two people who had probably had maybe a couple dozen students, maybe a couple hundred at most, were going to be able to overthrow the Chinese government. It just wasn't going to happen. But the biggest takeaway I really get from this isn't necessarily that they were doing that, because they got busted and the Chinese government is going to rain down hard on them. That's just how that's going to go. But what really gets me is how many times in the article it's alluded to that simply the things that they were saying was what they were really getting in trouble for. Things like speaking out against how they felt about the government, things like speaking out against how they felt about COVID-19, things like that. Now, attempting a coup to overthrow the government in any country that you go to is going to have serious repercussions if you're caught. That's just the facts. With all that said, though, it brings up something really interesting to discuss, which is censorship. What is and is not allowed to be said and written down is a very interesting thing. When you start trying to stop people from speaking their minds and you start regulating their speech, where does that stop? Now, here in the United States, we have freedom of speech, and I'm very grateful for that freedom of speech. It allows me to do things like these videos. It allows me to discuss topics that might not necessarily go over well in other countries. So I'm very grateful for that. But in this story, we can clearly see that there was a singer in China who was arrested for simply speaking his mind about how he felt about COVID-19. However you feel about COVID-19, however you feel about how things are being handled, whether you feel like they're being handled well or being handled poorly is not really the point. The point is, shouldn't you be allowed to speak your mind about how you feel about those things? Now, I've always been under the impression that if you allow people to speak their mind, you find out what type of person they really are. You can find out what's going on in their brain. You can find out what they're about as a human being and a person. When you start stifling their speech and stop allowing them to speak their mind, it becomes much more difficult for you to understand where they're coming from in their thought process. I think that when we start looking at stories like this, on the surface, we can look at it and go, oh, well, these are two people that tried to overthrow a Chinese government. That's basically the headline of the story. But deeper than that seems to be, what do we think about free speech? What do we think about the ability to say and write down and express our feelings and how we can communicate to the outside world or how we can communicate with other people, basically just through our words and our thoughts? I'm really curious what you guys have to think about that, because they're also being charged for things like speaking out and speaking their mind about how they feel. I think that obviously you're going to be in trouble if you start trying to overthrow your government. You're going to be in trouble with things like that. But should you be in trouble for just saying how you feel about how things are being handled? Should you be stifled to the point where you're not allowed to have a thought, an independent thought come out of your mouth without being attacked legally by your government? Now, once again, I already said this before, obviously that's China, that's not the United States, but I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who comes from the United States. I'm speaking of the perspective of the world. Is it okay for those rules to be in place to stop you from speaking your mind? As always, I am really interested to hear what you guys have to think about this particular story and the addition to what you feel about the freedom of speech. Do you think that we should put laws in place to stop people from being able to speak their mind? Do you think that there's a line that you can cross in which you kind of went overboard? Or do you think that people should be allowed to say whatever, whenever, and however they want? Let's see what you have to say about it in the comment sections below. As always, thank you all for the likes, comments, shares, and all that other crap people online tell you to do. Keep the martial arts legit.